Welcome and thank you for joining Transformina for today's panel. Today's theme is a reality check on renewables, mainly the grid edge revolution. Unsurprisingly, according to Google's 2020 trends, coronavirus was the most searched term on the web. Today, instead of focusing on the most searched topic, I want to highlight one of the most and best emerging technology trends from last year. And obviously, hopefully, it's a positive one, indeed a positive one. Grid edge may not compete with coronavirus in terms of search queries, but it's a new dimension in the energy landscape, leading to new levels of sustainability, resilience, flexibility that we will need during the pandemic and beyond. Grid edge is where most research and development, most innovation is focusing on right now. And some of the elements of grid edge as we know it is in the wind, alternative renewable energies, so wind, solar, microgrids, storage, and electric charging for e-vehicles. Today, we will discuss the wide range of technologies, from electric vehicles to solar panels. My name is Franco Atassi. I am the CEO for Siemens Smart Infrastructure in the Middle East. I am very passionate about the digital transformation for future cities. And I am very pleased and honored today to be joined by our first Karim. Karim Mousa is the Middle East Business Development Manager for Siemens for Future Grids and Renewables, where he focuses on integrating photovoltaic, energy storage, electric mobility systems into the smarter cities of the future. For over 10 years, Karim has been involved in both the renewables and conventional energy industries in the MENA region. Karim works very closely with the utilities companies in addressing our future renewables and how to integrate that into their strategies now and in the future. Next, the first ever operational net zero energy city in Dubai. Let's meet the team behind this through its Chief Sustainability Officer at Diamond Developers, Mr. Karim Jisr, who is passionate about deploying technologies to achieve sustainability with a people-centric approach. And this is a major note here is people-centric approach. So welcome to the panel, Karim and Karim.
Thank you. Thank you, Franco.
Mr. Karim Jisr from Diamond Developers. Let me address you first. I had the pleasure of experiencing the sustainable city recently, and I can't say I was impressed. I was overwhelmed with what your team has built there. So if you can share with us, tell me what is it like to build such a sustainable city project and how you think the grid edge will play an important role in it across the development, across the city.
Great. So first of all, thank you for the visit. You know, we're always delighted to receive our colleagues and partners at Siemens and other industries and sectors as well. The sustainable city it's a learning platform for all of us. You know, it is a living laboratory, so we always have an open door policy. So what's it like to build a sustainable city? Let me first say that anytime that you design and build something for the future, whenever you deviate from the norm, from traditional development or conventional development, you're going to invite skepticism, right? Because you are trailblazing, you're testing something new, you're increasing the ambition, deploying new technologies. And by bringing all these technologies together in a space that we now call the sustainable city in Dubai, of course, we're going to invite skeptics. But skeptics are also important to the journey because they raise the right questions, you know, and they question our assumptions, they question the vision. So I think one of the beauties of designing and building the sustainable city is that it is really journey for many of us, not only for the developer, but also for the end users and the stakeholders, as well as the utilities and the service providers. So we have many stakeholders who were involved in the early phases of the sustainable city. So as diamond developers, we master plan, that's what we do. But then we have to liaise with relevant government entities and authorities. And in a certain sequence, in the case of Dubai, you start with the Dubai Land Department, then you move to Dubai Municipality, then you move to Diwan, RTA, and then Dubai Police, and then do Etisalat, etc. So there was a lot of engagement in the planning phase of the sustainable city. The construction phase started in January of 2014, and the first residents moved into the city in 2016. So within 2 years, we had our first residents. And now, fast forward in 2021, we're still in the pandemic, but I think we're coming out of it. And as we say, alhamdulillah, we are now at full occupancy. And this is the first time in the history of the sustainable city. So today we have a proof of concept, and this is something we wish to replicate. Now, so where does grid edge play a role in the sustainable city? So from day one, which means 2013, when the master plan was announced, and we have to remember that our knowledge of grid edge in 2013 was less mature and advanced than today, 2021. But back then even, we committed to designing a net zero energy development, which means that on paper, after energy modeling everything, we can estimate how much electricity we will consume at full occupancy and how much we would need to produce within the boundaries of the development. So, and at the time in 2014, we must remember there was still no regulation in place, but working with DIWA and other entities, the net metering distributed solar rooftop regulation was endorsed. That was in December of 2014. And so when the residents moved into the sustainable city in 2016, we were able to now connect, produce electricity, and then enjoy the benefits of the Shams Dubai program, which it became known as the Shams Dubai program. So Grid Edge was the first enabler to the vision of going net zero. And that was before the Paris Agreement. This was 2014. But since 2014, we've also embraced new technologies and benefits of Grid Edge related to monitoring, load monitoring at the level of the villas and the community. So we're not talking BMS anymore. We used to talk BMS for large buildings. Think of something much smaller so that individual units can also have access to their own energy profile. And then we also get into charging. So from day one, we said we want to enable electrification as a developer, as a community. And to do so, well, we need to provide the infrastructure. And that infrastructure has developed and evolved since 2014 significantly.
Great. Karim, the innovation and digitalization, whether in Grid Edge and other technologies, at times right now, the focus is on it and it's surpassing industry. So how do you, within the sustainable city, how do you account for future innovation, future technologies to be implemented? I am sure the sustainable city is not a static city. It's always evolving. So how do you account for that? And how did you plan for that? Because things are changing as we speak.
Absolutely.
We can be better, faster, we can take smarter decisions, data analytics, digital equipment, all interconnected. So how do you accommodate for that and account for that in the future?
So absolutely, cities are vibrant, and they have to be, because otherwise I think cities will decay if they do not evolve and embrace the opportunities that the future brings to us. And so in 2014, we had to put on a lens which says, okay, we look into the future, and then we say, well, let's bring it forward, and what may we need in the future? And I'll give you a couple of examples. So in 2014 with Shams Dubai, when it comes to solar rooftops, the focus was simply on managing the solar electricity, the DC-AC conversion. So we want to maximize self-consumption, and then we want to export the surplus. Mm-hmm. Fine. But in the future, if the tariff structure changes, and if the utility, in our case, DIWA, encourages consumption during off-peak, then, through a different tariff structure, then we may want to start considering energy storage. Energy storage was not an option in 2014 because it's was prohibitively expensive. But today we're talking about roughly $200 to the kilowatt hour. So if a villa needs about 25 to 50 kilowatt hour, it becomes more manageable. But here's how we plan for it, by providing the space. So our villas, our 500 units, are all equipped with an electrical room and a DC AC converter, and then we have a wall allocated for future energy storage, whether it's a power wall or it's any other energy storage system. So we need to have that space, because you cannot retrofit it in 5 years and say, oh, where do I put my batteries, right? So that's got to be part of the planning. Another way that we had to anticipate the future is that EV uptake. Yes, we encourage and we educate consumers and we promote electrification, but we also need to anticipate the load on the grid. And this is a challenge now for all of us, because if all that mobility migrates from gasoline to electric, then there is so much more power we will need. And that power has to come, well, in the case of a master plan community, it has to come from the various substations. And those substations have been designed with a certain load capacity as well. And so we need to have spare load, because we have to anticipate that uptake. And that spare load is difficult to negotiate. It goes back to master planning. There are fees to pay. And then for how long do you need the spare load? Do you just you just have it available and then you use it after 5 years, after 10 years? So there's a certain succession and evolution that one has to anticipate.
That's really interesting. That's great. Shifting to Karim, Mousa. Karim, innovative technologies are driving the electric vehicle revolution. According to IEA projections, there will be 200 million electric vehicles worldwide by 2030, not far from now. In fact, most of the car manufacturers have made a decision to go full electric in some of their portfolio by X year, and not far from now. The fundamental evolution in the way we move people and goods creates a broad need for electric vehicle infrastructure. The e-mobility or the e-chargers are a major element of grid edge technologies. But in general, what is the impact of e-mobility towards the energy transition? What's happening here?
Thank you, Franco. First, good morning to you, Franco, and good morning to Karim. Always a pleasure. What is the impact of e-mobility on the energy transition? Look, to try and put it in the simplest terms, the grid edge is essentially where our lives and electricity intersect, right? And for the vast majority of our lives, we've been moving around and past the grid edge without really noticing it. It's just been in the background. You might have noticed it when you're sitting in a metro or a tram and you look up and you see the overhead cables and you go like, oh, we're connected to the grid on the means of transport. But today the reality is changing, and e-mobility is really starting to change the way we look at our power grids, while also playing a very key role in fueling the energy transition. So it's a two-factor effect here. And when we talk about the impact of electric mobility on our energy transition and on our power grid, maybe it's worth mentioning 3 key points. And first is the topic of grid integration. So electric vehicle infrastructure essentially lives on the grid edge, just like us. And what that means is, in most places where there is a reliable electricity connection, EV infrastructure can exist. So that means you can have an electric vehicle charger outside your garage, you can have it outside a mall, inside your parking space. You can even install one in your bedroom safely if you wish to. Now, think about that in the context of today's transport, of today's conventional vehicles. You can't have a fuel pump outside your home. You certainly can't have a fuel pump outside a mall or even within a building, right? So electricity travels safely, it's cheaper, it's cleaner than liquid fuel. And this is really going to change the way we utilize the grid as a vessel for our transport. And this ease of deployment of electric vehicle infrastructure is again going to shape the load we put on the grid, and as a result, the energy transition. And I'll touch on the point that Karim just raised also regarding the additional load on the grid. But first, another key impact that electric mobility will have on the grid. No other form of transport utilizes distributed energy systems as much as electric mobility. And what that means is, in today's world, we're utilizing energy storage, wind energy, solar energy more than any time before that. And to think about it again in the simplest terms, you can have a solar rooftop panel at your house that is fueling your vehicle today. That means you as a consumer have the source of fuel for your vehicle on your rooftop, which is really changing consumer dynamics on, from the perspective of being a driver or a commuter and where you get your fuel from. And again, the equivalent in today's world is having an oil refinery in the backyard, in your backyard, which is probably not possible. So again, this ability to integrate electric mobility as part of our households and to have our own energy sources that are fueling our vehicles directly, to wake up every day with 100% charge in my car or your car. This is really going to change the way that we look and consume electricity for transport. The third key impact is vehicle to grid technology. Mm-hmm. So today, the direction of flow of electricity is almost one direction, right? It's coming from the grid into the EV charger and into our vehicle. And so it's charging our batteries in the car. Vehicle to grid technology enables the reverse flow of this electricity. So it's going to allow us to send electricity back into the grid. And again, this is going to have a drastic change on the dynamics of a grid. It's going to really change the way you look at drivers and commuters who own an electric car and a charger at home, because suddenly you stop becoming just a driver, but you're someone who's also supporting the grid. Especially if it has an added number of renewables and intermittency, your car becomes a battery, which can feed the grid in times of need. And I think here I can also touch on the very valid point, actually, that Karim mentioned. The more implementation of electric vehicle infrastructure, the higher uptake we have of electric vehicles. This is going to increase the load on our grids and on our power plants, and as a result, the connection to the substations, we're going to need to upgrade that. We're going to need to look at master studies, etc. But there's also another way, and I think me and Karim have discussed this a number of times as well, and that is smart charging. And as we move forward, you no longer have to upgrade your substation with let's say you're adding 200 kilowatt charging capacity on a site. So typically today, this means that you need to upgrade your substations by 200 kilowatts. But in the near future, and some of this is actually possible today, your chargers will begin speaking to their surroundings. So the electric vehicle charger can speak to another charger. The electric vehicle charger can speak to the building nearby. If the building nearby isn't consuming all its AC capacity, then it can give some electricity back to the charger. If it's not consuming some of its lighting, it's going to give its electricity back to the charger and vice versa. And by implementing such smart models, you actually save a lot on a CapEx upgrade, such as upgrading the substation, which you may have not needed in the first place, because likely, buildings are never using 100% all of the time, right? So there is always space for optimization. And I think smart charging is going to enable this for us.
This is really interesting. So there is a whole new dimension of the evolution of electric vehicles. Not only in the way how we consume, we may produce, and obviously a whole new dimension of how we distribute energy. And are we ready for it? Speaking of that, are utilities companies in our region, are they being proactive to address such a quick, you're talking about a decade of 200 million vehicles potentially, and a lot of those are going to be in our region. Are we proactively addressing this and planning for this? Because obviously it's not a plug and play. You just can't put chargers and say, now I can electrify my vehicle.
Absolutely, Franco. So, I have the optimistic view on this question. I think our region is off to a relatively slow but very good start. I have to say the awareness in our region is rising exponentially. The uptake of electric vehicles is also in the majority of countries rising exponentially, and that's thanks to a lot of the vehicle OEMs introducing a lot of new vehicles. So we've seen over the past few months many vehicle OEMs committing to electric targets by 2025. Some of them have said that all our vehicles are going to be electric by then. And naturally, you're introducing these options into the market, and you're going to have more consumers that want to purchase them. And utilities are starting to recognize and realize that they need to adjust, and they need to adjust pretty quickly. But it's not just to meet the consumer demands. I think there's also an opportunity which utilities are realizing. So today's fueling stations are going to be tomorrow's utilities, right? Because if a utility is installing a number of EV chargers around a city, essentially these are the equivalent of fuel pumps, right? From different worlds, but essentially what you're starting is a fuel pump business. And utilities are also realizing that to take advantage of this in the future, they need to begin now. As this uptake of vehicles continues, whoever is better positioned early on, whoever has more chargers, a better developed network, is going to take advantage of that. So I think utilities are off to a good start. There's still a long way to go, but I think we're making some progress.
Thank you. Good to hear. Shifting to Karim Al Jisr. Karim, the sustainable city is really a city where you can live, work, go to school, ride horses, grow your own vegetation, watch movies, go shopping. It's a city. And you mentioned that your approach was people-centric approach. And we all know to reach a certain sustainability, whether it's net zero, net positive, it's a journey. So lots of interaction of the people, the inhabitants themselves. And obviously, there are some other challenges outside of your city when you were developing such a project when it comes to regulations and so on and so forth. So if you can what are some of the challenges in developing such a project? And after you develop it, you bring people in it, what are some of the challenges to get people to be involved? Because as we know, we can put a gold-plated system in there. If people awareness, if they're not interacting with such technology, it may not get us to achieve our targets quick enough or in the plan that we put.
I like to talk about hardware and software, right? So the city is the hardware, the infrastructure, and many of us engineers and architects and planners, we focus on the hardware, and we anticipate the software to come and just plug in. We anticipate the people to come and enjoy it. Mm-hmm. On the challenges, obviously many, and I think these challenges are very country specific. There might be some common challenges throughout the GCC, then throughout the Arab world, and then we get into Europe, etc. But many challenges when it comes to grid edge and net zero carbon or net zero energy are country specific. So in the case of the UAE, and here I mean Dubai, I mean Abu Dhabi is a different landscape, and Sharjah is a different landscape, energy landscape as well. It is about having the right policies in place, and they may still be nascent policies, but they can mature. The policy that will enable grid edge technology, that will enable rooftop solar generation, policy that will promote and facilitate export. Policies also that allow communities to be car-free, for example. We want narrow streets. We don't want big streets because big streets are exposed to the sun, etc. in this part of the world. So it starts with having a policy environment which is never ready. We shouldn't assume that future cities will naturally grow because the policy is set. The cities can influence the policy as well. So I think it's a very dynamic interaction that we need to have as developers upstream with utilities, authorities, and then downstream with our end users and residents. And so here is the challenge, that even if you design a perfect city with the best of grid edge technology, you still need the end users, the residents, to appreciate, understand, and become better stewards of the planet. If I provide a home, a villa, a housing project with an energy use intensity of say 85 or 90 kilowatt hour per square meter per year, that is achievable if we behave in a certain way. But if we have people coming from somewhere else and who are completely, let's say, not switched on, or do not appreciate the energy equation, then perhaps that energy use intensity can double, can increase to 160. So there's a lot of education involved. And we felt that skepticism, not only from the authorities, but also from potential investors and buyers and tenants. Fast forward, we've done a lot of education. So my lesson, obviously, or my recommendation to town planners, city planners, and community development or owner associations is really to consider the end users. There is an ongoing, we call it community education, that needs to happen. Community education can be virtual today, can be physical, can be blended. We can use our various apps to engage as well the residents, and it's about seeing is believing. So when people see a rooftop solar system and see the numbers go up and down based on the sun, and now it's overcast, and then they see the 100% fully charged car the next morning, like Karim said, this is where we educate. And it's really important to educate, and it's a continuous process. Obviously, formal education in school, but also equally community education. Ultimately, all of that leads to behavior change, right? So I believe the future of cities, even when we talk grid edge technologies, it is as successful as behavior change. We need those two to work together to achieve the Paris Agreement, the SDGs, and other relevant goals, societal goals. Ultimately, all of this is going to help us reduce emissions. Let's remember, grid edge is not for the sake of technology, right? We want to humanize technology to achieve something. In our case, we want to reduce our carbon footprint because we have to all reduce our emissions.
Great, thank you, Karim, Mousa. During the pandemic, there has been a shift. Most of us are working remote. Most of us work from home. So we shifted from office environment, commercial, to consuming energy in our residential. Our peak and non-peak had shifted, obviously, because the way we work and when we work, et cetera, et cetera. So a question to you. How can the different players interact and collaborate to reach a new level of sustainability? Resilience, obviously, power quality, and so on and so forth, the requirement for that right now. And also the explosion, if you may, of data centers all over, just because now we rely a lot more on data from the way we communicate and work. So how do people play together, collaborate, and interact to reach sustainability, resilience, and flexibility that we need right now during the pandemic and beyond? If you have an opinion on that.
Absolutely. I think with time, there's more and more complexity being added to the grid. And partnerships are generally the key to driving the development of any future grid here or in other regions. The difference is today we live in a world where digitalization and connectivity within our energy systems, they're more inherent than ever before. So new means of collaboration that didn't exist before on our grids, on our energy systems, are now becoming a reality, are now becoming a new business or partnership models that can be adopted by consumers and utilities. So this is challenging really the conventional definition of working together on the grid. And the primary driver here is decentralization. And I think Karim touched on it quite a lot, but we're moving away from centralized partnerships and agreements really to decentralized. And to enable this, one of the things that I think we need to be able to really drive and enable even further is the transformation of many of us from consumers to prosumers. And what that means is essentially, today a lot of us are, simply grid consumers, and this is the way that the relationship exists between us and the utility. And whenever you think of a partnership on the grid or a partnership on the grid edge, you're typically thinking of, some sort of collaboration or agreement between a utility and a distribution company, or a utility and another utility, etc. But again, today these definitions are changing. As a consumer who will become a prosumer, the partnerships can become between you and the grid, can become between you and the distribution company. So it moves away from these centralized blocks to decentralized, to a fully decentralized dynamic market where each of us as prosumers exhibiting different characteristics on the grid. I might consume less energy than someone else, which means I might be able to send more electricity back into the grid and be rewarded for it. Meanwhile, somebody else or a commercial or industrial lab might need more energy and might rely more on someone who's already producing a surplus of energy rather than investing in added capex and adding more diesel generators or whatever it is they need to meet their power demand. So the transformation of us from consumers to prosumers is going to be really a key in the future means of partnership that are going to happen on the grid. And another enabler for this is going to be the microgrid. And I think the microgrid is, or let's say provides the bigger picture of prosumers and consumers working together to achieve one big supportive ecosystem.
Right.
And I think a good example of this was, I read an example of 3 buildings somewhere in Latin America. The 3 buildings are right beside each other. And due to a regulation in that area, each building needed to have some sort of backup and emergency power. So they had, the 3 buildings had a diesel generator, they had solar power on the roofs, and they had small batteries in each of the buildings. And in the future, I hope and I believe what these, this example of 3 buildings will be able to achieve is they'd be able to set up a microgrid between each other. And instead of everyone setting up systems which could be redundant and come at an extra cost, one might invest in a battery energy storage, the other might invest in a solar rooftop, and the other might invest, or the third might invest in a diesel generator. And then they might trade this energy between each other, right? You don't need to have redundant systems in each building. So this is what the microgrid is going to enable. And I think if we were able to expand this again on a city scale, like the sustainable city, I think we're going to really witness microgrid behavior in the very near future where, a factory that's installing emergency power batteries is not only installing it for itself, but rather can trade this emergency power or surplus power with the grid, with its neighbors, etc. I think another example, if you allow me, is if you are the owner of an electric bus station, for example, one partnership or contract model that I can imagine in the future is that you can get into a contract with the local utility and you have a certain agreement where these buses are parked, that these buses are providing emergency power back into the grid. So, think of the dynamics there. You're no longer just an owner of a bus network, but you have this added revenue and added contribution to the grid. So I think, the sky is the limit when it comes to potential partnerships on the grid in the near future.
Great, thank you. Karim, Jisr, when you said, utilizing disruptive innovation and disruptive technologies and implementing those will always draw skeptics, as you mentioned it. And I am amazed and I'm very, very pleased to see how your development, your project had proved many wrong, and it's really leading in the innovation. Your comment of grid edge is here to drive sustainability. Absolutely. Karim, Mousa, renewables are here to stay and flourish. And they will impact the energy transition. So we have to allot for it. So, therefore, these are great examples that you have shared with us today. Grid edge is more than just a buzzword. There is a lot of emphasis on it. Like I said, a lot of R&D, a lot of innovation are happening right now at the grid edge. It's a real game changer to foster sustainability. So let's embrace the opportunities of what the grid edge has to offer. Allow me to thank you again, Karim and Jisr. Thank you so much for sharing your insight and the details on the great development that you have, Sustainable City of Dubai. Karim, Mousa, thank you for sharing your insight as well on renewables, electric charging technology, if you may. And how that impacts the way we are set up right now. And for that, thank you again. And it was a great panel, and hope to see you again soon. Be safe and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.